Admiral Steve Collins watched the Council fleet approach through the sensor displays of his flagship, the Freedom's Price. 67 alien warships arranged in standard attack formation, their weapons powered and shields raised for battle. The most powerful naval force the Council had assembled in 50 years, commanded by Admiral Hayes of the Viridian Third Fleet. Steve's force consisted of only 12 ships, human vessels that had been quietly modified over the past year with technologies the Council had never seen. Technologies developed by human scientists working without the restrictions and oversight that had limited their creativity for centuries. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Council fleet," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Carol Zhang. "Admiral Hayes is demanding our immediate surrender and return to Council space." Steve activated the communication channel, and Hayes's face appeared on the main screen. The Viridian Admiral looked confident and slightly annoyed, as if dealing with a minor rebellion that had gotten out of hand. "Admiral Collins, you will order your ships to stand down immediately," Hayes said in the musical voice typical of his species. "The Council has declared human settlements beyond our borders to be illegal colonies in violation of galactic law. You have committed acts of theft by removing Council property and personnel without authorization." Steve felt anger rise in his chest, but kept his voice calm and professional. "Admiral Hayes, humans are not Council property. We are free beings, with the right to choose where we live and work. We have committed no crimes except refusing to accept second-class citizenship in your empire." Hayes's expression hardened. "Your people signed contracts to serve Council interests. Those contracts remain binding regardless of your personal preferences. Return to Council space immediately or face the consequences of defying legitimate authority." "The consequences of freedom are worth any price," Steve replied, then closed the communication channel. The Battle of Kepler's Gate began 60 seconds later when the Council fleet opened fire with coordinated volleys of plasma torpedoes and particle beam weapons. The alien commanders expected quick victory against a small force of human ships using obsolete technology. They were not prepared for what happened next. Steve's ships activated defensive systems that the Council had never encountered. Energy, shields that absorbed and redirected incoming weapons fire, hull materials that became stronger under stress rather than weaker, electronic warfare systems that disrupted alien targeting computers and navigation sensors. The human ships moved through the Council formation like dancers avoiding clumsy partners, their superior agility and acceleration making them nearly impossible to target effectively. Return fire from human weapons punched through alien shields as if they were made of paper, disabling Council ships without destroying them completely. Within 30 minutes, the most powerful fleet in Council space was drifting helplessly through the asteroid field where the battle had taken place. No ships destroyed, no lives lost, but every alien vessel disabled and powerless. Admiral Hayes found himself aboard the Freedom's Price as a rescued prisoner, his own flagship crippled by weapons, systems he did not understand. Steve met him in the conference room with professional courtesy but no deference. "How?" Hayes asked simply. "Our intelligence indicated that human technology was decades behind Council standards." "Your intelligence was based on what we were allowed to develop under Council oversight," Steve replied. "When humans work for themselves instead of alien masters, we tend to be more creative." Dr. Maria Santos entered the conference room carrying a datapad filled with technical specifications. She was the head of human weapons development, a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had spent 40 years designing defensive systems that Council regulations had never permitted her to build. Admiral Hayes, human military technology has always been constrained by Council safety regulations and approval processes, Maria explained. For example, our new shield systems use quantum field manipulation techniques that your scientists classified as too dangerous for development. The approval process would have taken decades, so we never pursued the research. And now? Hayes asked. Now we build whatever works, Maria said with a slight smile. Turns out humans are very good at making things work when we don't have to. Ask permission first. Hayes looked at the specifications Maria had provided and felt something approaching shock. Human technology had not just advanced beyond Council capabilities, it had advanced so far that the gap might never be closed. Energy systems that were 3 times more efficient than anything the Council possessed. Materials stronger and lighter than alien alternatives. Weapons that could disable enemy ships without killing their crews. These advances should have taken decades to develop, Hayes said. They would have, under Council restrictions, Steve replied. Human research was limited to improvements of existing alien technologies. We were not allowed to explore fundamental new approaches or conduct experiments that might challenge established scientific theories. Remove those limitations, and human progress accelerates dramatically. General Alex Turner joined the conversation, bringing with him additional evidence of human capabilities. Alex was a quiet man who had spent his career studying alien military doctrine and finding its weaknesses. He had planned the Battle of Kepler's Gate down to the smallest detail. Admiral Hayes, the Council made a critical error in strategic assessment, Alex said, activating a holographic display that showed the tactical analysis of the recent battle. Your forces assumed that human capabilities remained static while your own technology continued to advance. This assumption was incorrect. The display showed weapon effectiveness ratios, shield strength comparisons, and maneuverability statistics that told a clear story. Human ships were not just more advanced than Council vessels. They were designed according to completely different principles that made traditional alien tactics useless. Council military doctrine has not changed significantly in 200 years, Alex continued. Your strategies and tactics were developed for fighting other Council species using similar technologies and approaches. Humans think differently about combat, and we had a long time to study your methods while serving in Council fleets. Hayes absorbed this information with growing concern. The Council's military superiority had been the foundation of their political authority for centuries. If humans could defeat Council fleets this easily, then the entire balance of galactic power had shifted overnight. What do you want? Hayes asked finally. Steve exchanged glances with Maria and Alex before answering. Recognition of human independence and sovereignty over the territories we have established. Reparations for decades of forced labor and restricted development. Equality in any future diplomatic relationships. The Council will never agree to those terms, Hayes said. Then the Council will continue to face the consequences of their choices, Steve replied. We did not seek this conflict, Admiral. We simply wanted to leave peacefully and build our own civilization. The Council chose to pursue us with military force. Hayes was escorted back to his disabled flagship with a message for the Council leadership. The human fleet had demonstrated its capabilities clearly, but had also shown restraint by avoiding unnecessary casualties. The choice of how to proceed was now up to the aliens. Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld, the political situation was becoming increasingly unstable. Infrastructure failures were affecting every aspect of galactic civilization, and member species were beginning to question Council leadership. Counselor Korthek of the ancient Karathi delegation requested an emergency session to address what he called the most serious crisis in Council history. The Korathi were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and their words carried significant weight in council deliberations. Fellow counselors, we face the collapse of our civilization due to our own arrogance and short-sightedness, Korthek announced to the assembled delegates. We treated humans as servants while depending on them as the foundation of our society. Now they are gone, and we are learning the true cost of our prejudice. Council Prime Veltar attempted to maintain the traditional Viridian position. Counselor, Korthek, temporary technical difficulties do not constitute civilizational collapse. Council ingenuity and determination will overcome these challenges as we have overcome all previous obstacles. Prime Veltar, these are not temporary difficulties, Korthek replied, his aged voice carrying the authority of centuries. Food production systems are failing across 17 worlds. Power grids are collapsing on 23 colonies. Transportation networks are disrupted throughout Council space. Our finest military fleet was defeated by 12 human ships without losing a single crew member. The council chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed the implications of Korthek's words. The military defeat had been classified information, but the Korathi intelligence network was extensive and well-informed. Furthermore, Korthek continued, preliminary analysis indicates that human capabilities have advanced far beyond our own during their brief period of independence. We are no longer dealing with the limited servants we remember, but with a technologically superior civilization. 3 years had passed since the last human transport departed Council space, and the galaxy looked very different now. President Helen Murphy stood in the observation lounge of New Terra Central, watching construction ships assemble the newest habitat ring around humanity's capital station. What had started as an emergency evacuation had become the foundation of a thriving interstellar civilization. Madam President, the monthly production reports, said her chief of staff, David Kim, handing her a data tablet filled with numbers that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Industrial output was up 400% over pre-Exodus levels. Agricultural yields exceeded anything achieved in Council space. Technological advancement was proceeding at a pace that astonished even human scientists. Helen reviewed the figures with satisfaction mixed with amazement. Human productivity had exploded once they were working for themselves instead of alien masters. The restrictions and oversight that had seemed like normal bureaucracy in Council space had actually been crushing human potential for generations. What about the diplomatic situation? Helen asked. Ambassador Clark reports that 6 more Council species have formally requested admission to the Human Confederation, David replied. The Altarians, the Centauri Republic, the Vegan Assembly, the Proxima Collective, the Wolfpack Alliance, and the Tau Ceti Federation, all offering full compliance with Confederation laws and human leadership structures. Helen was not surprised. The former Council territories had become a patchwork of failing governments and collapsing infrastructure. Some species had managed to maintain basic civilization, but none had achieved the prosperity and stability that characterized human space. The irony was beautiful and terrible. The aliens had spent centuries believing they were naturally superior to humans, only to discover that their entire civilization had been built on human expertise. Without that expertise, they were reduced to begging for admission to the society they had once ruled. What are their populations? Helen asked. Combined approximately 2 billion sentient beings across 47 star systems, David said. Most are offering complete integration rather than autonomous membership. They want full access to human technology and economic systems. Helen considered the request carefully. The Human Confederation had established strict standards for membership that emphasized equality, merit-based advancement, and respect for individual rights regardless of species. Any group that met those standards was welcome, but the standards were non-negotiable. Schedule integration assessments for all applicants, Helen decided. Full cultural compatibility reviews and infrastructure surveys. If they can demonstrate genuine commitment to Confederation principles, we'll accept them as equal members. Across the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Freedom's Price on a diplomatic mission to the former Council Core worlds. Jake had been promoted to head of Human Diplomatic Services, responsible for managing relationships with the dozens of alien governments that had emerged from the Council's collapse. His current destination was Viridian Prime, once the proud capital of galactic civilization, now a struggling world facing energy shortages and economic stagnation. The crystal spires still gleamed in the starlight, but many of the residential districts were dark due to power grid failures. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Viridian Traffic Control," reported his communications officer. "They're requesting immediate assistance with orbital platform stabilization. Life support systems are failing on 3 habitat modules." Jake was not surprised. The Viridians had always been more interested in beautiful architecture than practical engineering. Their orbital platforms were artistic masterpieces that required constant maintenance by people who understood both aesthetics and structural mechanics. Without human engineers, the platforms were slowly falling apart. "Dispatch engineering teams to assist with emergency repairs," Jake ordered. "Standard humanitarian protocols. The engineering teams would stabilize the life support systems and prevent immediate casualties, but they would not repair the underlying design flaws that made the platforms vulnerable. That level of assistance would require formal agreements and long-term commitments that the Viridians had not yet been willing to make." On the planet's surface, former Council Prime Veltar lived in a small apartment in what had once been the government district. The Grand Council chambers were empty now, abandoned when the member species departed to form their own governments or seek admission to the Human Confederation. Veltar spent his days writing memoirs that nobody would ever read, trying to understand how the greatest civilization in galactic history had collapsed so completely. The answer was obvious but painful to acknowledge. They had built their empire on the labor and expertise of people they refused to respect as equals. "The humans were always more capable than we realized," Veltar wrote in his journal. "We saw them as useful tools rather than intelligent beings, with their own potential and ambitions. We assumed their loyalty and took their contributions for granted. When they left, they took with them not just their labor, but the knowledge and skills that held our society together." Veltar had requested meetings with human diplomatic representatives, hoping to negotiate some form of reconciliation or assistance. The responses had been polite but clear. Viridian Prime could apply for Confederation membership like any other world, but there would be no special treatment based on past relationships. The application process required comprehensive reforms of Viridian society, including elimination of species-based hierarchies and establishment of merit-based governance systems. Most Viridians found these requirements incompatible with their traditional culture and preferred to struggle with independence rather than submit to human oversight. Dr. Lisa Grant, now serving as chief historian of the Human Confederation, was documenting the transformation of galactic civilization for future generations. Her research had uncovered the full scope of human contributions to Council society, revelations that astonished even humans who had lived through the changes. The data shows that humans were involved in 93% of all infrastructure design and maintenance operations, Lisa explained to a gathering of Confederation officials. 87% of agricultural systems, 74% of manufacturing processes, 68% of transportation networks. The Council did not just depend on human labor. They depended on human knowledge and innovation for literally everything that made their civilization function. The audience listened in stunned silence as Lisa presented chart after chart showing the depth of human integration into alien society. The Exodus had not just removed workers, it had removed the intellectual foundation that supported galactic civilization. The most remarkable aspect is that this dependence developed gradually over 2 centuries, Lisa continued. Each generation of humans improved and refined the systems they inherited, making small modifications that accumulated into fundamental transformations. By the time of the Exodus, Council infrastructure was essentially human technology operated by aliens who did not understand how it worked. Admiral Ben Carter, now elderly but still sharp, served as senior military advisor to the Confederation Defense Forces. He had lived through the entire transformation from human servitude to human independence, and his perspective was invaluable for understanding how far humanity had come. The greatest mistake the Council made was assuming that military power guaranteed political control, Ben told a gathering of young officers. They had bigger fleets and more advanced weapons, so they believed they could force humans to remain in subordinate positions indefinitely. Ben activated a holographic display showing the current distribution of military forces throughout human space. The Confederation Navy was smaller than the old Council fleet had been, but it was also more advanced and more strategically positioned. What they failed to understand was that military technology depends on industrial capacity and scientific innovation, Ben continued. They could build impressive warships, but they could not build them without human engineers and human manufacturing. Expertise. When humans left, they took those capabilities with them. The strategic implications were profound. The Human Confederation possessed not just superior military technology, but also the industrial and scientific infrastructure to maintain technological advantages indefinitely. Any potential enemy would face opponents who could innovate faster and produce better equipment. Captain Jake Morrison completed his diplomatic mission to Viridian Prime and filed his report with Confederation headquarters. The situation was exactly what human intelligence had predicted. The former Council core worlds were slowly collapsing under the weight of technological challenges they could not solve. The Viridians have made some progress with basic infrastructure maintenance, Jake reported to President Murphy during their secure communication session. But they're still losing ground overall. Power output is down 30% from pre-Exodus levels. Transportation capacity is down 50%. Food production is down 40%. Murphy reviewed Jake's detailed assessment with mixed feelings. She felt sympathy for the millions of aliens struggling with problems they had. The war against the Harvesters raged across the galaxy for 2 years, and it was unlike any conflict in recorded history. This was not a battle between equals fighting for territory or resources. It was a struggle for survival against an enemy, so advanced that defeating them required humanity to sacrifice much of what had once made them human. General Frank Cooper stood on the bridge of the flagship Silent Promise watching as human strike forces engaged Harvester swarms throughout the Orion sector. The ship around him was as much living organism as machine, with hull plating that could heal from damage and weapon systems that adapted to enemy tactics in real time. The cost of building such vessels had been measured not just in resources, but in human lives. Strike Group 7 reports successful elimination of 3 Harvester vessels, announced Captain Bill Martinez from his station. They are moving to intercept the swarm heading toward the tidal refugee fleet. Acknowledged, Cooper replied. Deploy Strike Groups 4 and 9 to cover their withdrawal. We cannot afford to lose any more ships to prolonged engagement. The human fleet had grown powerful over the 2 years of war, but it remained vastly outnumbered. For every Harvester ship they destroyed, 10 more seemed to take its place. The key to their success was not overwhelming force, but surgical strikes that disrupted Harvester coordination and prevented them from completing their feeding cycles. On inhabited worlds, humanity had learned to fight like wolves attacking a bear. Quick strikes, hit-and-run tactics, never allowing the enemy to bring their full strength to bear. It was effective but exhausting. Human crews pushed themselves beyond normal limits using biotechnology that enhanced their reflexes and endurance at the cost of their long-term health. In the command center, deep within the Silent Promise, President Linda Hayes reviewed reports from across the war zone. She had aged visibly over the past 2 years, carrying the weight of decisions that determined which worlds lived and which died. The woman who had once been a simple colony administrator now commanded the defense of an entire galaxy. The refugee situation is becoming critical, reported her aide, Dr. Angela Cross. We have 17 million council survivors spread across 43 temporary settlements. Food production is struggling to keep pace with demand, and medical supplies are running dangerously low. Hayes studied the holographic displays showing refugee camps scattered throughout the galactic rim. They represented the remnants of civilizations that had once numbered in the billions. The proud Zenthari reduced to a few thousand warriors. The wise Ethon, down to scattered individuals who had lost their group consciousness, entire species hanging on the edge of extinction. What about the Gordani situation? Hayes asked. Stable for now. We managed to evacuate about 2 million before. Their homeworld fell. They have adapted well to the agricultural work in our settlements. The Plexi refugees are having more difficulty. They are not handling the stress of displacement well. The truth was that humanity had saved what they could, but it was a fraction of what the galaxy had once been. Billions had died in the first wave of Harvester attacks before human forces could mobilize. Entire species had been wiped out completely. The galactic civilization that had existed for 3,000 years was gone forever. Captain Amy Walsh commanded one of the search and rescue fleets that constantly swept through former Council territory looking for survivors. Her ship distant, Hope had been modified with stealth technology that allowed it to avoid Harvester detection while evacuating refugees from behind enemy lines. It was dangerous work that had cost many human lives. Captain, we have located survivors on the 4th planet, reported her tactical officer. Sensors indicate approximately 50,000 life signs hiding in underground shelters. They appear to be a mixed group of species. How many Harvester ships in the system? Walsh asked. 3 vessels conducting systematic harvesting operations on the primary world. They have not detected the survivors yet, but they will complete their current feeding cycle within 6 hours. Walsh made the calculation that had become routine during the war. 50,000 lives against the risk of losing her ship and crew. The mathematics of survival in a galaxy where every life mattered, but every ship mattered more. Begin approach vector, she ordered. We go in fast and get out faster. Signal the survivors to prepare for emergency evacuation. The rescue operation succeeded, but barely. Walsh's ship managed to evacuate 42,000 refugees before Harvester patrols detected their presence. 8,000 beings died in the underground shelters as the planet's crust was consumed around them. It was another small victory, measured in lives saved rather than enemies defeated. Back at the main human command base, General Cooper received a priority communication from President Hayes. The message was encrypted with codes that indicated its extreme importance. When he decoded it, Cooper's expression grew even more grim than usual. "All senior staff to the briefing room immediately," he announced. "We have received new intelligence about Harvester strategic objectives." The briefing room filled with humanity's top military commanders and scientists. These were the people who had spent years studying their enemy and developing the weapons needed to fight them. Their faces showed the strain of constant warfare, but also the determination that had kept them fighting when victory seemed impossible. Our intelligence networks have discovered that the harvesters are not just harvesting biological matter, Cooper announced. They are specifically targeting species with advanced cognitive abilities, the group consciousness of the Ethon, the tactical instincts of the Xanthari, the pattern recognition abilities of the Tidal. They are building something with the minds they absorb. Dr. Marcus Stone stepped forward to present his analysis. The elderly scientist had volunteered to be partially infected with harvester biotechnology to better understand their goals. The procedure had saved his life, but changed him in ways that were both fascinating and disturbing. The harvesters are not just weapons, he explained. They are components of a vast intelligence that spans multiple dimensions. Each harvesting cycle adds new cognitive abilities to their collective consciousness. They are evolving, becoming more than they were. "What does that mean for us?" asked Admiral Sarah Clark. "It means they are preparing for something bigger than just consuming our galaxy," Stone replied. "The pattern suggests they are building toward a confrontation with an enemy we have not yet encountered. We are being harvested to provide the intelligence they need for a war that exists on a scale we cannot comprehend." The implications were staggering. Humanity was not fighting to save the galaxy from destruction. They were fighting to prevent the galaxy from being converted into ammunition for a cosmic war beyond their understanding. The stakes were higher than anyone had realized, but the war was reaching its conclusion regardless of cosmic implications. The harvester forces were weakening as human tactics disrupted their coordination and prevented them from completing feeding cycles. Without fresh biological matter to process, they could not maintain their numbers or replace damaged ships. Final battle came when the last major harvester fleet made a desperate assault on humanity's main stronghold. 300 alien ships emerged from dimensional space around the fortress, where millions of refugees had taken shelter. It was clearly intended to be the decisive engagement that would determine the war's outcome. General Cooper led the defense personally aboard the Silent Promise. Around him, the entire human fleet formed defensive formations, while automated weapon platforms added their firepower to the battle. The space around the fortress became a maelstrom of energy and destruction as two incompatible forms of life fought for survival. The battle lasted 14 hours and ended with humanity's victory, but at a terrible cost. Half the human fleet was destroyed. Thousands of soldiers died defending the refugee settlements. The Silent Promise herself was badly damaged, with General Cooper among the casualties. But the Harvester fleet was completely eliminated, and with it the last major threat to the galaxy's survivors. In the aftermath, President Hayes addressed the reformed Galactic Council from her hospital bed, where she was recovering from injuries sustained during the final battle. The communication was broadcast to every surviving settlement throughout the galaxy, reaching an audience that numbered in the millions rather than the billions who had once called this galaxy home. "The immediate threat has ended," she announced. The harvester forces have been eliminated or driven beyond our sensor range. We estimate it will be several thousand years before the next harvesting cycle begins. That gives us time to prepare and rebuild." The response from the Council survivors was a mixture of gratitude and shame. They had been saved by the species they had dismissed as paranoid and primitive. Vexathera spoke for many when she transmitted her reply. "Humanity, we owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You tried to warn us and we did not listen. You saved us when we deserved abandonment. How can we rebuild the trust that our arrogance destroyed?" Hayes's response was carefully measured but firm. "Trust is not rebuilt with words. You mourned our absence, but you never questioned why we left. For 50 years we brought you evidence of this threat and you dismissed. 6 months after humanity's disappearance, the first signs appeared, and they came not as whispers, but as screams that echoed across the galaxy. Ancient systems buried deep within dead worlds began to stir. Machines that had slept for 50,000 years opened sensors that had been waiting patiently for the cosmic alignment to reach its predetermined position. On the barren world of Xerion 9, mining crews from the Krex Empire were extracting valuable crystals when the ground began to shake. Deep beneath the planet's surface, something vast was awakening. The miners felt vibrations that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the planet itself was coming alive. "Get everyone back to the ships," shouted Foreman Claxter as his crew scrambled toward their transport vehicles. Behind them, the mining site erupted in a fountain of metal and energy. Something enormous burst from underground. It was clearly artificial, but unlike any technology the galaxy had ever seen. The object was the size of a city, and it moved with purpose that spoke of intelligence. The thing that emerged from Xerion 9 was only the beginning. Across 17 different star systems, identical events were taking place. Dead worlds that had been silent for millennia were suddenly active. Ancient machines were digging their way to the surface and launching themselves into space with technology that defied known physics. On the Council homeworld, emergency sessions were being held around the clock. The great chamber that had once echoed with diplomatic debates now rang with panic and confusion. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy, and none of them made sense according to current scientific understanding. "The objects appear to be some form of automated probe," reported Chief Science Officer Nexara to the assembled delegates. "They are scanning inhabited systems and transmitting data to unknown destinations beyond our sensor range. We have attempted communication but received no response." Counselor Jex Tar of the Krex Empire was pacing across his platform, which made a clicking sound with each step. His species had evolved from predatory insects, and their instincts screamed danger when faced with unknown threats. "These machines are clearly weapons," he declared. "We should destroy them before they can report back to whoever sent them. The Krex fleet stands ready to eliminate this threat." Elder Sylph of the Ethon Collective disagreed with her usual calm wisdom. "Violence should not be our first response to the unknown. These devices may be attempting to establish communication through methods we do not understand. We should study them peacefully and try to learn their purpose." But while the Council debated, the mysterious probes were completing their mission. Within days, they vanished back into the depths of space, leaving behind only sensor readings and growing fear. What they had been scanning for remained a mystery, but somehow everyone knew that their purpose had been fulfilled. The answer came 2 weeks later, when the first harvester ship emerged from dimensional space near the Plexi homeworld. The vessel was massive beyond comprehension, stretching over 50 kilometers in length. Its surface was a mixture of metal and organic matter that pulsed with its own life. It moved through space like a living creature swimming through an ocean of stars. The Plexi defense fleet consisted of 12 small patrol ships designed for protecting their peaceful trading vessels. They approached the alien ship with caution, broadcasting messages of greeting and welcome in 17 different galactic languages. The Harvester's response was immediate and devastating. Beams of energy that seemed to bend reality itself reached out from the alien vessel. The Plexi ships simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized, but deleted from reality as if they had never been built. The technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to those who witnessed it. The Harvester then turned its attention to the Plexi homeworld. The planet's population of 8 billion small furry beings had no idea what was about to happen to them. They went about their daily lives trading goods and raising families while death approached from the stars. The process was called harvesting for good reason. The alien ship did not destroy the planet with weapons. Instead, it extended tendrils of energy that penetrated the atmosphere and began converting the planet's biosphere into raw materials. Plants and animals and even the Plexi themselves were absorbed into the ship's structure, becoming part of its living hull. Within 6 hours, the Plexi homeworld was nothing more than a barren rock orbiting its star. 8 billion lives had been consumed and processed into materials that the Harvester used to grow larger and stronger. The ship then moved on to the next inhabited system, leaving behind only silence and death. News of the Plexi massacre spread through the Council network like wildfire. Species that had spent centuries debating philosophy and trade agreements were suddenly faced with extinction from an enemy they could not understand or fight. Panic gripped the galaxy as more Harvester ships began appearing throughout known space. The Zenthari Empire responded as their warrior culture demanded. Admiral War assembled the largest battle fleet in their history and intercepted a Harvester ship in the Vega system. 300 Zenthari warships surrounded the alien vessel and opened fire with every weapon they possessed. The result was another lesson in the futility of fighting an enemy so advanced that they might as well have been gods. The Harvester ship absorbed the energy from the Zenthari weapons and converted it into power for its own systems. The barrage of missiles and plasma beams only made it stronger. When the Zenthari realized their weapons were useless, they attempted ramming attacks. Brave captains drove their ships directly into the Harvester's hull, hoping to cause damage through sheer force. But the alien vessel's surface simply opened like a mouth and swallowed the attacking ships whole. The proud Zenthari fleet that had dominated this region for 1,000 years was consumed in less than an hour. On the Council homeworld, Vexthara was receiving reports of similar defeats from across the galaxy. The technological gap between the Council species and the Harvesters was so vast that resistance seemed pointless. Advanced civilizations that had thrived for millennia were being wiped out as easily as someone might step on insects. But in the depths of space, something else was happening. Council search teams had been following the trail of humanity's exodus for months. They had found abandoned supply stations and temporary settlements that suggested the humans had planned their departure carefully. The trail led toward the galactic rim, where few species had ever traveled. Captain Amy Walsh led the search mission aboard the exploration vessel Distant Hope. She was a member of the aquatic tidal species and had worked closely with human researchers before their disappearance. Her ship had followed hyperspace signatures and debris fields for weeks, trying to understand where humanity had gone. "Captain, we are detecting artificial structures in this system," reported her science officer. The readings suggest massive construction projects, but the design patterns are unlike anything in our databases. What they found changed everything the Council thought they knew about humanity's disappearance. Hidden in the shadow of a rogue planet was a fortress that defied description. It was clearly human in origin, but the technology involved was centuries ahead of anything humanity had possessed when they were Council members. The fortress was armed with weapons that seemed to incorporate principles from Harvester technology. Its hull was partially organic, suggesting that humans had somehow learned to merge biological and mechanical systems. Most shocking of all, the structure was huge. It could house millions of people and defend itself against fleet-sized attacks. How did they build this? Captain Walsh whispered as her ship approached the fortress. They vanished only 6 months ago. This would take decades to construct. The answer came when they were contacted by the fortress commander. General Frank Cooper appeared on their view screen wearing a uniform that incorporated elements of armor, clearly derived from Harvester biotech. Behind him, the bridge of the human facility bustled with activity as technicians monitored screens showing Harvester movements throughout the galaxy. "Captain Walsh," General Cooper said with grim satisfaction, "we have been expecting Council search teams to find us eventually. Welcome to humanity's first line of defense against the Harvest. We have been preparing for this war for over a century." The revelation hit the Council delegation like a physical blow. Humanity had not discovered the Harvester threat 6 months ago. They had known about it for generations. The Exodus had not been a panicked flight, but the final phase of a preparation that had been underway since before most Council species had achieved spaceflight. "You knew," Captain Walsh accused. "You knew this was coming and you said nothing." "We tried to warn you," Cooper replied coldly. "For 50 years we brought evidence to the Council. Archaeological data, energy readings, historical patterns. You dismissed us as paranoid warriors seeing threats that did not exist, so we stopped trying to convince you and started preparing to survive." As the Harvester ships continued their advance across the galaxy, consuming world after world, the Council finally understood the scope of their mistake. Humanity had not abandoned their allies. Their allies had abandoned them first by refusing to listen when listening could have saved everyone. 3 months had passed since the human delegation failed to appear at the Council session, and the galaxy was beginning to feel their absence in ways no one had expected. What started as confusion had grown into genuine crisis as the delicate balance that humans had maintained for 3 centuries began to collapse. In the Vega system, tensions between the Zenthari Empire and the Ethon Collective had reached a breaking point. Both species claimed mining rights to the asteroid belt that contained rare metals essential for their technologies. For decades, human diplomats had mediated such disputes with careful negotiations and compromise solutions. Without that steady influence, old rivalries were surfacing like poison from a wound. Commander Thexval of the Zenthari battle fleet Crimson Blade gripped his command chair as his ship faced off against 3 Ethan vessels. The Zenthari were a proud warrior race standing 12 feet tall with natural armor plating and 4 powerful arms. They had dominated this region of space before joining the Council, and their instincts told them to take what they needed by force. "The mining platforms are rightfully ours," Thexval declared over the communication channel. "Our surveys mapped this system first. We will not yield to philosophical debates and pretty words." On the lead, Ethan's ship Captain Serenthi moved like flowing water as she considered their response. The Ethan were beings of pure energy contained within crystalline bodies that allowed them to exist in physical space. They valued wisdom and careful thought above all else, but they were not weak. Their ships carried weapons that could turn matter into pure energy. "Violence is the path of the primitive mind," Serenthi replied calmly. "We propose a joint expedition with shared resources and knowledge. Both our peoples would benefit from cooperation rather than conflict." "Your cooperation is weakness disguised as virtue," Thexavel shot back. "We take what we need. That is the way of strength." 3 years ago, this same argument had erupted between their species. Ambassador Kate Morris had spent 2 weeks shuttling between their fleets and their home governments. She had crafted a mining agreement that gave the Zenthari the metals they needed while allowing the Ethon to study the unique energy signatures in the asteroids. Both sides had left satisfied. Now there was no one to bridge the gap between their vastly different world views. Back at Council headquarters, Vexathara was discovering just how much work the humans had been doing behind the scenes. Her staff brought her reports of trade disruptions spreading across the galaxy. Human transport ships had carried goods between 47 different worlds. Human agricultural techniques had made 15 planets capable of feeding their populations. Human medical technology had been saving millions of lives every year. "The food situation on Gordani Prime is becoming critical," reported her aide, Nexalar. "Their population has tripled over the past century thanks to human farming methods. Without the human supply ships bringing nutrients from other worlds, their crops are failing. We estimate they have enough food for maybe 6 more months." Vexathara felt her crystal form dim with worry. The Gordani were peaceful slug-like beings who had never developed advanced technology. They had joined the Council for protection and trade. If they starved, it would be a catastrophe. "What about the Plexi colonies?" she asked. Even worse. The small furry beings had established settlements on 12 ice worlds using human heating technology. Without maintenance and replacement parts, their environmental systems are breaking down. They are requesting emergency evacuation, but we do not have enough transport capacity. The truth was becoming clear. Humanity had not just been members of the Council. They had been its backbone. Their ships had carried cargo. Their diplomats had prevented wars. Their scientists had solved problems. Their doctors had healed the sick. Their engineers had built the infrastructure that kept dozens of civilizations functioning. On the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Dr. Kylo Varn made a discovery that would change everything. The elderly scientist had been searching through databases looking for any clue about humanity's disappearance when he found a hidden message buried in the station's memory banks. It had been placed there by Captain Steve Rodriguez just before the human evacuation. The message was encrypted, but Dr. Varn had worked with human researchers for 40 years. He knew their coding methods. When he finally decoded the file, his 4 hearts nearly stopped beating. "The sleepers wake when the stars align," the message read. "We tried to warn you through proper channels for 50 years. You called us paranoid. You said we saw threats that did not exist. Now we must save ourselves because you will not listen. Search the archives of dead worlds. Look for the pattern. Every 50,000 years they come. The harvest begins when the alignment is complete. We go to prepare. Find us when you finally understand." Dr. Varn's tentacles trembled as he read the message again. He had dismissed human warnings about ancient threats as the fears of a young warrior species. But Captain Rodriguez had been his friend and research partner. If Steve said something was true, it deserved investigation. Over the next week, Dr. Varn dove deep into archaeological databases. He found human research reports that had been filed with the Council but largely ignored. Studies of dead civilizations on 17 different worlds, analysis of energy patterns found in ancient ruins, theories about cyclical extinction events that the Council's historians had rejected as impossible. The evidence was overwhelming once someone took the time to look. Every 50,000 years, advanced civilizations vanished from the galaxy, not through war or disease or natural disaster. They simply disappeared, leaving behind empty cities and silent worlds. The humans had discovered this pattern and tried to warn everyone, but the Council had been too proud and too comfortable to listen. Young analyst Zephyr worked in the Council's historical department. She was a member of the aquatic tidal species, known for their excellent memory and pattern recognition abilities. When Dr. Varn brought his findings to the Council, she was assigned to verify his research. Zephyr spent months swimming through data archives. Her people's natural ability to see connections allowed her to trace the pattern across millions of years of galactic history. The builders who had created the great ring structures around gas giants, the gardeners who had terraformed 1,000 worlds, the weavers who had connected distant star systems with quantum communication networks, all gone. All vanished at regular intervals that matched the cosmic alignment cycles the humans had identified. "It is true," she reported to the Emergency Council session. "The evidence exists in our own archives. We simply never looked for the pattern. The humans found what we missed because they approach problems differently than we do. They see threats where we see stability. They prepare for war where we assume peace." In the Vega system, the standoff between the Zenthari and Ethon fleets had escalated. Both sides had called for reinforcements. Weapons were being charged, shields were being raised. Without human mediation, the ancient hatred between warrior and philosopher was about to explode into open warfare. But something else was stirring in the deep spaces between stars. On dead worlds throughout the galaxy, ancient systems were beginning to activate. Signals that had been dormant for 50,000 years were starting to pulse with life. The cosmic alignment was approaching, and the galaxy's new harvest was about to begin. The Council had spent 3 months wondering where humanity had gone. Soon they would understand that the real question was not where the humans had vanished, but what they had been running from. The galaxy was about to face a threat that would make their petty territorial disputes seem like children's games, and they would face it without the species that had tried to warn them, without the diplomats who had kept peace, without the warriors who had known how to fight, without the engineers who had built their infrastructure, without the doctors who had healed their sick. The Council was about to learn what the galaxy looked like without humanity, and it was going to be a very dark lesson indeed.